Rex K9 is already airborne, a sable streak punching through candlelit air as the suppressed shot thunks into joists and shakes dust like dry snow. Emily is breath and heartbeat on the floorboards, counting the tiny silences between impacts, learning fear's arithmetic. Thomas lowers his center of gravity, the old discipline waking without permission, mapping exits and angles as if the kitchen were a drill he never forgot. Ryan, ribs strapped and lungs rationed, slides into cover, reading shadows as if they keep minutes. Melted footprints shine on tile, tracking a slush of road grit and pine needles that betray approach. A second figure misjudges traction, weight skids, intent shows its seams. Sirens live somewhere far and uncommitted. Rex K9 releases in a measured pivot, body forming a living barricade between danger and the small human he understands before anyone else. The house exhales smoke and resolve. Winter draws long breaths over the ridge, letting the cedar hush stretch until footsteps become punctuation. Emily moves by habit and hope, her mind cataloging textures, frost-furred needles, a vein of ice across the footpath, a taste of iron in the wind that doesn't belong. Rex K9 travels ahead like certainty with a tail, reading currents, mapping heat, insisting the world is writing something urgent beneath the snow. The slope opens to a gully where stillness is wrong. A cruiser lies on its side, a toy tipped into cotton until the spiderweb windshield glints red and declares consequence. Steam hisses a thin whisper. The radio mutters names without answers. Breath fogs within, shallow and stubborn, the metronome of a life refusing to sign off. Emily holds herself steady the way lonely children learn, while the dog presses closer, choosing purpose over comfort as snow rehearses erasure.
Gravity and time argue at the ridge, counting backward from catastrophe. The guardrail wears a smear of impact like a chalk note. Glass tinsel salts the drift, glittering with unkind cheer. Officer Ryan's pulse is a thin wire holding a tent in wind. His chest rises in fractions, ribs writing objections beneath fabric. The cabin smells of coolant, gasoline, and the sharp medical whisper of bandage adhesive clinging to a wrist. Emily inventories details because order can slow panic. Fractured map screen, a pen lodged under the brake, a photograph cornered beneath a floor mat. Rex K9 studies air as if it were a file, tracing sweetness that doesn't belong to trees, a chemical ribbon, brake fluid's ghost, rehearsing its case. Snow ticks into seams, practicing burial. The clock on the dash blinks an hour that pretends to be relevant. Survival insists on other math. The slope is a pact between balance and will. Emily's boots audition failure, then settle into steadiness bought by fear and love. She understands the distance to town as a story, without time. She understands the man's breath as a command without words. Rex K9 makes the choice first, muscle and mission tightening into a line that pulls toward help. The leash slips through gloved fabric like a betrayal engineered by necessity. The dog becomes an amber lantern flickering between trees, a beating signal with fur. Emily stays, because small hands can keep warmth where machines lose it. Because counting breaths is a task that matters. Because leaving entirely feels like desertion. The ridge answers with fresh wind and the petty cruelty of drifting snow, each flake a vote for forgetting. The cruiser ticks as heat contracts, a metronome counting decisions that cannot be rehearsed again.
Tools live on the bench in orderly ranks, small certainties set against larger weather. Grief stays in the spaces between sockets where fingers rest when work stops. The knock at the door isn't a knock, it's a body thrown by urgency. Rex K9 brings winter in his coat and purpose in his eyes, a language Thomas spoke long ago without verbs. The truck coughs awake with old indignation and a promise to try anyway. Headlights carve tunnels through static. The mountain keeps its tilt and its rules. In Thomas's chest, an old metronome resumes, the measure of movement in danger, the budget of breath. The slope gives up the wreck the way a pocket yields a forgotten nail, reluctantly, suddenly, capable of harm. He checks airway, spine, bleeding, the litany that trades panic for process. Emily's flashlight is a second sun with shaking hands. The Ridge observes, unhelpful. Metal protests with brittle language as doors give up a captive. Weight reallocates from machine to man. Thomas turns strain into form, letting knees do labor, keeping Ryan's ribs from arguing louder. Emily becomes light's custodian, keeping shadows honest, making a path where snow conspires. Rex K9 patrols a small orbit, nose sampling cold and coolant, guarding the flank against invisible outcomes. The embankment edits footing with malice. Boots slip, then correct, then commit. Wind blades cheeks raw, breath writes specters that tangle and vanish. Up top, the road wears black glass beneath powdered innocence, a hazard marketing itself as scenic. The truck's open mouth waits, heater begging to be believed. They load consequence into vinyl and resolve into hands. The world shrinks to gauges, thrum, and the small sounds injured people make when they don't consent to quitting. The Ridge keeps its receipt.
Distance grows teeth at night. Tires find traction like truth, intermittent, sufficient, never promised. The steering wheel is an oath Thomas renews corner by corner. Emily leans against Rex K9, borrowing his heartbeat the way sailors borrow a lighthouse. Memory trespasses uninvited. A hospital corridor years earlier. Antiseptic air, a weight leaving a hand forever. She blinks and files it elsewhere. Ryan's breath saws in fractions. Pain edits posture. Consciousness negotiates extensions. A fallen branch drags them into exposure. Thomas moves fast enough to frighten the cold and returns rhymed, eyes narrower, jaw set. The truck fishtails once, a warning flung like gravel. They accept it. The highway is a ribbon transferring hope at imperfect speed. Headlights of a sleeper cab pass, a witness that cannot carry anyone. The hospital's glow finally arrives, a subdued continent promising bureaucracy and oxygen. The storm refuses to applaud. Hospitals speak bright truths without kindness. The stretcher eats distance. Gloved hands translate urgency into practiced motion. Nurse Linda's competence is a windbreak against collapse. Numbers become anchors even when they misbehave. Ryan surfaces to a ceiling grid and the steady tyranny of beeps, learning again how ribs set boundaries on thought. The blanket's detergent is not his. Ownership ends at survival. Pain clarifies priorities. Suspicion whispers names it can't yet prove. Emily stands at the foot like a lighthouse with knees. Thomas's shoulders lower a fraction, gratitude negotiated with exhaustion. Rex K9 waits where rules put him, eyes cutting lines through glass, tail a slow metronome that keeps panic from changing key. The clock up the hall insists on minutes. The heart monitors insist on seconds. Outside, winter argues with streetlights. Snow tries new choreography. The world keeps moving without their consent.
Returning, the road bargains again, giving just enough friction to stay responsible. Rex K9 stiffens before the headlights find the disturbance. A dog reading an index while humans scan for titles. Snow has slid off rock like a curtain, revealing a dented toolbox embedded at an angle too theatrical for accident. Wrenches gleam with oil bright as confession. A brake bleeder smiles the wrong kind of smile. Thomas knows residue by taste. Ryan knows narrative by placement. Convenience in crime is performance art. Careful sabotage prefers clean exits. Jack Hanley's rig slows with curiosity and road-worn generosity, Chain singing an old song about grades and discipline. A few words and a shared look transfer understanding. This is not lost. This is planted. The lid closes with a finality that feels staged. Rex K9 circles, uneasy, the way guardians grow uneasy when the story tries too hard. Morning sands the scene to its essentials. The void where the cruiser lay is a negative sculpture in snow, edges charred by friction and grief. Rex K9 quarters the ground, nose weaving a net of invisible threads. The guardrail is a reluctant witness, bolts smudged where gloves dragged, paint disturbed in a pattern too orderly for chaos. Brake fluid's sugared ghost rises from blackened crystals, a sweetness out of place, an aftertaste of malice. Ryan's camera clicks softly, filing minutes into future arguments. Thomas watches treeline, not roadway, understanding threats like to walk in on conversations. The second stain is faint, but decisive, interrupted as if wiped fast by someone who noticed time. Snow squeaks under boots with the sound of secrets resisting translation. The ridge looks innocent in daylight. Innocence is often a lighting trick. Rex Canine stands still, then returns to Emily and waits.
Communities digest fear with casseroles and rumors. At the diner, steam fogs windows while certainties are traded in sugar packets and nods. Some choose accident because intent makes sleep harder. Some rehearse names under breath, testing how accusation sounds. Emily hears grown-ups say hero like a helmet they want to try on. She holds the word differently, feeling its weight next to a dog's steady breath. Thomas buys bolts and silence, tools and small talk anchoring him to normal. Ryan sits back from glass and counts the reflections that linger too long. Morton's name appears with charity attached, his foundation logo traveling ahead like a snowplow. People like checks bigger than problems. Cameras like smiles bigger than truth. Rex Canine receives a hand on the head from a child he doesn't know and accepts it because dignity allows kindness. The storm pauses. The ridge keeps its counsel. Kyle Morton curates images the way collectors curate glass, clean, reflective, fragile in the right light. Charity footage hangs on hallway monitors like certificates of grace. Foundation vans idle outside with blankets stacked photogenically. His trucks wear chains whose diamond bite prints don't advertise aggression, only competence. He speaks about winter hardship and a register calibrated to gratitude. Ledger ghosts tell a different sermon. Waystation skips named after birds. Shell nonprofits paying rent in warehouses with too many cameras pointed outward. Procurement orders that circle like patient hawks. Ryan arranges paperwork like a chessboard and regrets the cliché while using it. Emily, across town, files photographs into constellations someone else will understand later. Rex Canine naps with one eye, paws twitching through remembered snow. Morton's cologne is citrus with Pepper's quiet threat. It drifts through spaces he recently left, a signature disguised as hospitality.
The toolbox sits on the table like a prop demanding applause. Its weight performs importance. Its placement performs innocence. Thomas memorizes nicks that feel borrowed, not earned. Ryan flips tools and imagines the hands that touch them. Speed versus care. Gloves versus skin. The choreography of someone who wants to be seen by the wrong officer and believed by the right judge. The bleeder kit's threads gleam too clean for field work, as if staged to pop on camera. A mechanic with debts could fit the costume. A ledger with motives does not need costumes. Emily notes the foam imprint inside the lid. One slot empty, no dust ring where time should have drawn a witness. Rex Canine stands at the doorframe and tastes air as if the hallway carried a rumor. The trap offers a handle to grab. Truth suggests letting go and circling wider. Back at the ridge, thaw patterns expose what snowfall tried to edit. A second footprint of sabotage emerges upslope. Tiny crescents of disturbed ice arranged near a line that overlooks both approach and exit. 2 tamper points mean someone mistrusted luck, built backup into malice. Redundancy is the vocabulary of planners who cannot afford survivors. Ryan photographs in silence because saying it early lets doubt learn your cadence. Thomas marks distances with an old soldier's eye, pacing lines as if the ground remembers everything. Brake fluid crystals glitter where shadow lingers longest. Sugar scent rises briefly, then gives up to pine. Emily watches Rex Canine choose paths that avoid glare ice without thinking. The dog pauses at a bend and stares at tree line as if time were hiding there. The conclusion isn't dramatic, it's heavy. Intent becomes architecture, and the ridge shows its blueprint reluctantly.
Patrol gloves carry stories in seams. One pair smells faintly of the same citrus pepper cord that trailed through Morton's corridors and clung to a locker where inventory lied. The match isn't proof. It's a raised eyebrow in a room that prefers polite eyes. Ryan files the detail where suspicion can breathe without accusing. Trust is a muscle that tears easily and heals slowly. The department limps when rumor whispers. Thomas watches Claire, steady, methodical, tired by other people's shortcuts, and chooses patience over pronouncement. Emily writes the scent on a sticky note because invisible evidence needs visible placeholders. Rex Canine noses the glove and sneezes, a joke gift-wrapped for tension, returning the room to human size. Outside, the plow leaves a berm at the corner like punctuation. Inside, maps learn new pins. The ridge is patient. Conspiracies are less so. Somewhere, a phone deletes itself imperfectly. Emily builds constellations on carpet. Receipts become stars. Photographs become anchor points. Red string is gravity pretending to be art. Her hands smooth crumpled edges, recycled duplicates, and a line forms by scent, not date. Cinnamon from the Tuesday bakery tags a time. Gasoline ghost flags a place. Detergent assigns a uniform. She copies clean maps in neat handwriting, letters small and stubborn. Thomas learns pacing to the rhythm of pencil scratch. Ryan nods his thanks without breaking her attention. Rex Canine performs door checks like prayers, moving threshold to threshold with ritual focus until the house agrees to calm. The bullet scar in the beam is a compass that always points to here. Outside, the town codes sympathy and suspicion into casserole deliveries. Inside, the trio codes survival into order. The ridge remains a picture on paper, scaled down enough to fit on a table.
Snow around the Carter house carries a palimpsest of ordinary life. Mail boots, neighbor's cat, delivery jog, children's short feet. Beneath a late skim, a different tread pattern sits heavier. Diamond bites that match chain links Ryan circled on warehouse photos. The mark is softened by drift, emboldened by repetition, a signature practicing in lowercase near their door. Thomas tastes the old chalk of vigilance along his tongue. Habits line up behind him quietly. Emily notices Rex K9's new ritual, a pause before thresholds, a lungful of hallway air, a glance back seeking synchronized breath. Danger rarely announces with drums. It favors carpets and complacency. Ryan shifts Ryan's plans forward by hours, then minutes, then now. The house tightens without conversation. The kettle hums as if domesticity can outsing threat. The ridge seems far in miles, close in consequence. Snow chooses decorum and pretends to be innocent. The house inhales once too sharply. Floorboards relay weight where weight doesn't belong. Hinges micro-groan as if surprised to be conspirators. The hallway coughs a shadow into view. Winter clings to coats that learned their manners elsewhere. Suppressed sound changes the room's physics. Air flinches. Candles spit. Thomas lowers into geometry that turns a kitchen into doctrine. Ryan calculates distances with ribs that lobby against heroics. Emily turns herself small and durable, finding the space beneath the table where heartbeats become audible math. Rex K9 is a choice embodied, trajectory built from 8 years of practice and one complete devotion. His launch is explosive but disciplined, the arc of a body that knows where tendons live and what teeth can convince. Impact edits intent instantly. The house stops being architecture and becomes memory in progress. Sirens remain theories. Snow arrives at the windows like an audience.
Violence turns kitchens into grids. The first attacker's balance breaks at the ankle. The second's plan breaks at the wrist. The dog's teeth choose muscle that removes control without inviting chaos. Thomas moves value, child, line of fire, field of view, like pieces in a game that doesn't forgive miscounts. Ryan's breathing turns staccato. Pain brackets precision. His sightline threads a safe corridor between ceramic and flesh. Suppressor coughs again. Ceiling accepts a new scar. Timber remembers. Meltwater puddles reflect a household rearranged by necessity. Rex Canine releases to reblock. Chest heaving, eyes bright with the arithmetic of protection. The floor holds objects that were dinner and are now debris. Time elongates until radial crackle arrives like punctuation. The door learns its agency back under boots with badges. The house is still a house, but it now includes a chapter about how to stay one. Deputies arrive with Winter braided into their coats and procedures braided into their steps. They subdivide threat and tidy chaos, the choreography of people who practice endings. One intruder bleeds into inevitability, the other evacuates into night with prints that soften by the minute. Questions travel with an edge, answers refuse suddenness. Claire's presence is steady, eyes tired from other people's lies. The citrus pepper echo that worried Ryan earlier ghosts his memory and then dissolves beneath disinfectant and exhaust. Suspicion is an indictment. It is a door many refuse to open for good reasons. Emily counts breaths without meaning to, storing them for later nights. Thomas sweeps splinters into obedient piles, clearing lanes for recovery. Rex Canine stands sentinel with damp fur and quiet lungs, a monument that wags once to reset the room's scale. Snow resumes its pageant outside, committed to pretending neutrality.
The investigation leaves footprints more orderly than the criminals. Bird-named route folders align with way station gaps and receipts that pretend to be random. A Foundation van's mileage responds to questions with arithmetic instead of charity, triangulating evenings where applause covered logistics. The warehouse camera's gaze stops precisely where it should continue. The blind spot is a confession stamped by habit. Tire chains leave diamonds that draw the same geometry outside the cannery, the storage condos, and a ridge turnout whose guardrail still remembers fingers. Ryan's corkboard turns trope into tool. Lines become sentences that refuse to unwrite themselves. Thomas volunteers a truck and his patience, both tuned to Winter. Emily copies routes into neat columns that make crooked things uncomfortable. Rex Canine watches the door with old intent, assigning each knock a value. The town hums, the ridge waits, the ledger begins to believe in gravity. The cannery sits where plows lose enthusiasm and sodium lights hum to themselves. Yard shadows layer like vellum. Metal ticks with the cold's metronome. Ryan and Claire park where engines won't testify. Thomas idles out of sight, a broken truck in convincing costume. Rex Canine leans forward in the harness, nostrils widening, chest rising like a starting bell. The citrus peppercord threads the breeze, twinned with diesel and old brine that never quite leaves fish buildings. A figure moves with careless expense, not the gait of someone who lifts. Timing governs courage. They ration seconds into placements. Radios whisper economy. Breath makes clouds that betray impatience. The tarp over pallet towers flutters a syllable. The gate's chain rubs a complaint. Winter offers mask and betrayal in equal measure. The stakeout almost fails from the boredom of accuracy before the yard finally admits it is populated.
Movement breaks the equation. Boots scrape, ladder bolts sing, tarp snaps like a flag of surrender. Ryan drives through pain, letting training handle math while ribs protest from the cheap seats. Claire flanks with patience that outlives sprinting. The figure stumbles where straps catch arrogance. The mask peels away by accident. Not Morton, someone polished and necessary, the operation's spine. A watch flashes luxury and in a seam carries the brake fluid's sugared ghost that courts microscopes. The phone in his pocket is an archivist with folders named like jokes that stopped being funny. He smiles as if law were a negotiation he always wins. Rex Canine inspects, sneezes, blinks, then stares, unimpressed by rehearsed confidence. Cuffs click like parentheses. The yard exhales, lights buzz. Snow chooses not to fall for 5 honest minutes. The ledger flips a page. The name behind names feels closer. Morton answers with posture and podium, draping himself in philanthropy like a wool coat that never stains. He speaks in sentences designed for Chiron capture, invoking winter, hardship, community, and the failings of men he barely knows. Cameras adore contrast. Cuffed hands somewhere else, a smile here. He promises cooperation that sounds like instruction. The town splits along familiar seams: gratitude versus memory, checks versus ledger entries, comfort versus evidence. Sheriff Hart replies with procedural gravity, neither theatrics nor apology, inviting patience to share the stage with frustration. Ryan watches from a distance where microphones cannot demand sound bites. Emily hates the way applause sometimes smothers truth. She also loves how Rex K9's medallion catches light at home when lamps are low. Thomas chooses to fix something small and useful, letting wood accept a scar without covering it. Winter regards facades and waits for thaw.
Paper arrives late and thin, but ink can still open doors. The warehouse breaks into chambers of intention, crates labeled blandly, contents curated criminally. Scrubbed electronics nest beside smaller caches that require hushed paperwork. Teams move with competence that relishes decisiveness. Morton remains elsewhere because distance is a privilege he buys often. Radios keep language clipped. Boots draft trust on concrete. The foundation van idles outside with blankets never destined for the stories they told. Claire counts, bags, signs, repeats. Rituals that earn weight later. Ryan stands where escape lanes converge, turning presence into deterrent. Thomas watches the road for headlight grammar that signals trouble. Rex, K9, waits in the truck, muscles coiled into patience, eyes translating wind like a second radio. When all settles, arrests outnumber ghosts, but not by margin enough to call it finished. The Ridge doesn't celebrate. It acknowledges a paragraph break. Repair is quieter than rescue. The oak beam takes varnish over splintered memory, transforming a wound into an index. Cabinets relearn their hinges. Glass withdraws from grout with resignation. The house returns to being a house, yet it now contains a chapter bound in darker thread. Emily honors Rex K9's new ritual, waiting at thresholds, letting him read air until consent arrives from instincts older than language. Thomas learns the creak patterns anew, calibrating midnight to normal. Ryan breathes through healed ribs that ache when weather changes, cataloging discomfort as payment rather than debt. The town starts a collection of opinions about closure. Casseroles migrate to other stories. Sheriff Hart seals the warehouse with tape that sticks both physically and symbolically, her hand lingering as if pressure could grant permanence. Winter loosens. Drip rhythm begins. Roofs find their throats again. The Ridge remains unchanged and instructive.
The community requests ceremony like a balm. Folding chairs line up. Streamers loop between beams. Names roll from a podium with care. Rex K9 wears a bandana that flatters muscle and age. Medallion resting where breath starts. Emily's silver star charm presses light against collarbone. A promise she made to steadiness rather than spectacle. Applause gathers and breaks like shore water, washing tired faces briefly clean. Thomas accepts recognition with the humility of a man who has replaced grandstanding with work. Ryan stands in uniform again, posture negotiating between pride and discomfort. Thoughts already filed toward the next warrant, the next winter. Cameras record the version of events that children can watch unafraid. Outside, crocuses preview spring by refusing weather's authority. Inside, cookies make sugar arguments for peace. The Ridge keeps its silhouette in the distance and remains disinterested in awards. Applause is not a gavel. Knights still ask for door checks. Trucks still idle where they shouldn't. Emails still arrive with words that bend. Ryan senses the applause's incompleteness, the way old injuries predict storms. Morton maneuvers while lawyers translate harm into invoice language. The town wants to be finished because finishing feels like warmth. Emily sharpens pencils and copies maps again, not because anyone asked, but because readiness feels like kindness.
Thomas leaves a small dent unpatched, a private memorial to intention interrupted. Rex Canine sleeps heavier but rises faster, aging into wisdom without withdrawing from duty. Sheriff Hart files reports that prioritize future cases over this story's neatness. Winter holds, then flickers, then concedes. The Ridge stands outside of narrative pacing. It doesn't care about satisfying arcs. People do. They make one anyway, with patience and watchfulness stitched into the hem.
Late winter's last evening leans warm against window glass. The house discovers its new definition of safe. Not the absence of threat, but the presence of preparedness. Rex Canine chooses a patch of floor where morning will land. His sigh is a release form signed by muscle and memory. Emily writes about ecosystems and smuggles community into the metaphor, sketching mycelium paths under trees and kindness paths under roofs. Thomas washes citrus soap from hands that once smelled of oil and decides to keep the new scent. Ryan parks outside long enough to measure calm and then leaves, understanding sometimes you guard best by staying in motion. The beam's scar gathers lamplight and returns it in calmer tone. Snow contemplates retirement. The Ridge is a silhouette in the mind now. It visits when needed, then recedes. Sleep arrives responsibly and keeps its promises. Spring enters without trumpets, preferring small percussion, drip rhythms, gutter chatter, gravel freed from ice. Court calendars collect names and assign days that will turn evidence into sentences and sentences into history. Morton's posture bends incrementally under paperwork and memory. Charity logos look tired on screens where maintenance messages linger. Sheriff Hart walks past the sealed warehouse and doesn't look in, trusting process over curiosity. Claire hangs a photo back on a wall and lets that denote alignment. Jack's rig hums through town once, chain song briefly pleasant. Mrs. Jenkins leaves a knitted blanket on a porch where two beings nap. No note, just warmth. Ryan files the last attachment and drafts a thank you he will never send. Emily knots the bandana behind Rex Canine's neck with ceremonial care. The dog yawns, ancient and satisfied. The house exhales peace like breath. The Ridge, at last, goes quiet.